What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over CP point distributions for a healer at various CP point, what I like to call check marks along the way. These check marks were kind of chosen by me a little bit arbitrarily, but they kind of signify various waypoints on your way up to max CP. So each one of these checkpoints kind of has a little bit of a significance for your progress in terms of how you progress through PvE. So those 4 checkpoints that I've decided to look at are CP 160, that's the gear cap. You have CP 300, this is the point where you no longer gain any additional attribute points, so health, stamina, or magicka, from gaining additional CP points. CP 450, this is generally the kind of happy medium where a lot of trials guilds, a lot of PvE guilds will ask for healers and support roles in general, so tanks as well, when it comes to adding them on to their vet trials teams. Just because the more CP you have, the more survivable you are, and tanks and healers, your survivability is probably the most important thing to your success in endgame PvE. So the more CP points you have, the better off you are, the more survivable you are. So most guilds will ask for anywhere between CP 400 and 500 for a healer to join their vet trials team. I have seen healers as low as CP 350 complete vet trials, the vet Craglorn trials. So it's not a hard rule, but CP 450 is comfortably high enough that you will be able to get into most, if not all, endgame PvE guilds that are doing vet Craglorn trials. And the final checkpoint that we're going to be going over is CP 600. That's generally recognized as the lowest CP that support roles should have when you're completing vet DLC trials like Maw or Halls of Fabrication. Again, it's not necessarily a hard cutoff. One of my raid guilds, Mayflower, our tank was CP 300 something, 320 or ish, when they cleared VMAW for the first time. So it's obviously not a hard rule, but it is very, very helpful again because you gain more survivability the more CP you have. So we will just be going over the CPT point distributions, and I'll kind of also talk about which passive nodes are the most important to invest points into while you are leveling up. So first thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go into redistribute and clear all of my CPs. So we'll start things off with CP 160. At this point you have pretty much hit the gear cap, and you have 54 red CPs, 53 green CPs, 53 blue CPs. I believe that is the distribution there. So we're going to start off with our green CPs. So the 2 most important nodes for healers in the green trees are going to be Arcanist and Tenacity. Arcanist because it boosts your magicka regen, and Tenacity because it helps you improve the amount of magicka you regain whenever you do a heavy attack. So combine that with the Restoration Staff passive that boosts the amount of magicka you get when you heavy attack, and you get a lot of magicka back when you heavy attack, and you have a lot of points in Tenacity. So we have 53 points to play around with. So we're going to hit 27 with Arcanist and 26 into Tenacity. So we aren't quite hitting the jump point here in Tenacity here. The jump point is 27, but that's okay. When you're leveling, you're not necessarily going to be hitting your jump points anyways. So jump points, for those of you guys who aren't aware, for CP points, you have a whole number, a decimal point, and then numbers afterwards. So 7.07, 7.28, 6.38, or something like that. The way the game calculates out CP point percentages is that every number after the decimal point is completely left off. So 7.07 and 7.28, you will see a 7% increase in your magicka regen. The percentage points afterwards, the tenths and hundredths place, they don't matter at all. So what the community has called jump points, which is basically the amount of CP points you need to put in order to get to the next whole number. So for example, 27 is a jump point for Arcanist because at 26 you're at 6.85. At 27 that bumps up to 7.07, so you're going up to the next whole number. So the 27 would be a jump point for Arcanist. Now, different nodes have different jump points depending on what their maximum value is in terms of percentages. So that's something you're going to just want to have to study up. So basically, there are basically 2 values that you can get when you put 100 points into any passive. It's either 15% or 25%, and jump points for each of those 2 types of nodes are going to be different. So I will kind of go over it as we go over more and more CP as we get to put more and more CPs into these passives. But right now, this is what I would do for green CPs here. For our blue CPs, this is going to be very, very simple. So there's basically only two nodes that you have to concern yourself with, and that's Blessed and Elfborn. Blessed obviously increases your healing done, and Elfborn increases the amount of healing that you do whenever you critically heal somebody with your Magicka heals. So when you use Breath of Life, for instance, and you manage to get a critical heal, Elfborn will boost the amount that that heal does by whatever percentage that you have in here. So these are the two most important nodes for a healer. So we have 53 points here, so we will put 27 into Blessed, and we'll put 26 into Elfborn. Now, Elfborn and Blessed are two examples of the different percentage points. So Blessed has a maximum value of 15%, and Elfborn has a maximum value of 25%. So these have different jump points. We can see here that at 27 we have 7% into Blessed, and 26 we have 11 into Elfborn. So they do have different values at different points, so they have different jump points here. But this is where I would put points into. Now there are other nodes that you could potentially put points into, but because the blue trees tend to be more focused on DPS, you're not necessarily going to be putting points into them, at least not at this point as you're leveling. It's more important to get the most important nodes done first before you start focusing on secondary nodes instead. Finally, for our red CPs. Now, Hardy and Elemental Defender are going to be the two nodes that you're going to want to focus on more than the others. The other two are going to be Thick-Skinned and Ironclad, and then Bastion is kind of a tertiary node that you want to consider using because it does boost your damage shields, so that's always very helpful to have. Plus, if you have 30 points of the Bastion, you can get in Infusion, which while you are a healer and you won't necessarily be rezzing very often, when you do res, increasing the Magicka regen that people get when you res them is going to be very powerful, especially for your Magicka DPS in order to get them back into the game a lot faster. So we have 54 points to play around with, so we will be hitting the 5% jump points for Hardy and Elemental Defender, which is 19. Then we'll put 10 into here, or not 10, 7, and then we'll put 8 into Ironclad. So we do not hit the next jump point in Ironclad, but that's fine. Oh, actually, one more. Sorry, 9 into Ironclad. I was thinking 53 for some reason. This is what we have here. Hardy Elemental Defender, again, we want to put more points into that because those don't really discriminate between damage over time and direct damage. So if you have a Flame Dot versus a Flame Direct Damage hit, Elemental Defender doesn't really care what it is. It'll reduce the damage done by 5%. So those are going to be giving you better return, better damage mitigation per point that you invest compared to Thick-Skin and Ironclad. We are putting a little bit more point emphasis into Ironclad compared to Thick-Skin, just because while there are some deadly dots in the game, especially in endgame PvE, they're not necessarily as prevalent, and a lot of them you can clean out with Purge, which is going to be a staple ability in your rotation lineup. So you know, Thick-Skin is not quite as important as the Ironclad because the direct damage hits, the damage that goes all in one blow. That's going to be what's going to end up killing you more often than not necessarily the dot damage. So that's why we have a little bit more into Ironclad compared to Thick-Skinned. And we don't really have any more extra points to put into Bastion, so we're not going to be putting points into Bastion right now. Alright, so that's CP 160. Now we're going to move on to CP 300. At this point, you're not getting additional resources for every CP that you gain. You have maxed out at the 20% additional resources. So you have 100 points to play around with in the green, red, and blue trees. So this is going to be actually very simple. You're just going to put 50 points in Arcanist and 50 points into Tenacity. You will overshoot the jump point by 1 point each, but that's fine. This is kind of, again, you want to get these 2 points up to as high as you can get them as early as you can because they're very, very powerful and they're very important for you to have as a healer. For our blue CPs, just like before, we're just gonna evenly spread our CPs between Blessed and Elfborn. So you do miss the jump point for Elfborn by 1 point, and Blessed you overshoot it by 1, so you can actually go 49 and 51 to hit the jump point in Elfborn. So that's what I would do. Again, these two nodes are going to be the most important for you as a healer, so we want to get these up as high as we can before we move on to any other nodes. And then for our red CPs, this is going to be, again, we're going to put more emphasis on Hardy Elemental Defender versus Thick-Skin and Ironclad. So we're going to hit the 8% jump point for both of these, so we're going to hit 32. Then we're going to do 20 into Thick-Skinned, Or not 20, I lied. Gonna do 16, and the remaining 20 will go into Ironclad. So we hit the 7% jump point for Thick Skin, and we're at 9% jump point for Ironclad. Again, we have more emphasis on Hardy and Elemental Defender, because those give us our biggest returns in terms of damage mitigation. Clear our CP points once again. This next is going to be CP 450, so you have 150 points to split between green, red, and blue each. So again, very, very simple. We're just going to be splitting these up. 75 into Arcanist, and 75 into Tenacity. Now at this point, I wouldn't put any more points into Arcanist and Tenacity because to get that extra 1% Magicka regen or 1% boost to Magicka you get back from your heavy attacks, you need to put in 25 points. That to me is not really worth it. Those extra 50 points combined can be put into other nodes that'll help out your stamina sustain. For example, Warlord, Tumbling, and Shadow Ward. Those are very important nodes in my opinion because they help maintain your stamina and reduce and improve the amount of times you can use Break Free or Dodge Roll, which could end up being very important in certain trials and certain scenarios. So at this point we've pretty much hit our max amount of CPs that I would put into Tenacity and Arcanist here. Same thing for our blue CPs, 75 into both. So at this point, the jump point for Elfborn here is actually going to be 72. 75 again is the max that I would put into Blessed because those 25 points could be put elsewhere. But you can put full 100 points into Blessed if you want to. So for Elfborn, again, the max for Elfborn is 25%. So you're going to basically be putting 28 points to get 2% additional healing done whenever you critically heal somebody. Depending on your feelings about this, it might not necessarily be worth it to you to spend that extra 28 points into Elfborn. That being said, for the blue CPs on a healer, like I said earlier, the blue CPs are focused more on improving your DPS, and as a healer, your DPS isn't very important comparatively, so you don't necessarily need to put points anywhere else except these two nodes, so you can keep them at 35 if you'd like. If you want to stick at 23, the 23% jump point for Elfborn, then you can start putting points into Elemental Expert instead. Elemental Expert and Spell Erosion are probably going to be the two ones that I would put things into, just because Spell Erosion will give us the best return in terms of improving our DPS, and the same thing with Elemental Expert. So once you hit your jump points that you want for Blessed and Elfborn, you can start putting points back into Elemental Expert and Spell Erosion, just to give you a little bit more DPS, just to contribute, help out the group a little bit more by improving your damage a little bit. Finally, for our red CPs, at this point we're able to start putting a few points into Bastion if we want to. So for Hardy and Elemental Defender, we're going to hit the 10% jump point, which is 43. Oops. For Thick Skin, we're going to hit up to 24, I think. No, 23 is a jump point. And we're going to hit the 11% jump point, which is 26. Actually, no, we're going up to 31. I lied. Then the remaining 10 points can go into Bastion here. So we do miss out on the jump point in Bastion by 1, but that's fine. As you're leveling, you're not necessarily going to be able to make the jump points for every single CP point that you get. That's fine. That's just the nature of leveling. And I sold the motif. Hooray! So yeah, that's how I would distribute it. Again, we're putting a little bit more emphasis into Hardy and Elemental Defender. And we're putting a little bit more emphasis into Ironclad just because direct damage hits are going to do more damage over time compared to damage over time abilities, and they're more dangerous overall. And finally, for CP 600, you have 200 CP points across green, reds, and blue, so 200 for each. So we're going 75 into Arcanist, 75 into Tenacity, and you can go all the way up to 100 if you'd like and just end it there. But I don't like to do that because, again, I think the extra 50 points could be placed elsewhere here. So we're going to do 20 into Shadow Ward. $16 into Warlord. And 14 into Tumbling. So we do over jump our Tumbling jump point by 1, but that's fine. Again, as you're leveling, you're not necessarily going to be able to hit each jump point as you level. So I like to put points into these three nodes specifically. because they help maintain my stamina for things like breaking free and dodge rolling. Those are actually fairly important, and you'll do them fairly often in trials. For example, in VHOF, you might be using breaking free a lot because you're getting stunned by the capacitors or some other mechanic. So being able to conserve stamina and reducing the cost of break free can be pretty important and can be a lifesaver in something like VHOF. Now for our blue CPs, again we're going to hit 75 into Blessed, going to hit 72 into Elfborn, and then we're going to put the remaining points into Elemental Expert. Here we're going to hit the 11% jump point, which is 49, and then put 4 points into Spell Erosion here. So again, these points are in here just because it gives us the biggest bang for our buck if we're trying to maximize your DPS here. But you can put these points elsewhere if you'd like. The other nodes that I would potentially put things into are going to be Thaumaturge, Master at Arms, and Staff Expert. That's because Thaumaturge improves your damage over time effects, which would be things like Blockade and your your spears, your shards. Staff Expert and Master at Arms. I would just put points at Master at Arms, not even bother with Staff Expert. That's just because Master at Arms does impact your light and heavy attacks. Well, your light attacks for your Resto Staff, actually. For heavy attacks with your Resto Staff, that actually, I believe, falls under Thaumaturge for most of it, for most of the damage. So you might not need to put as many points in Master at Arms. You can put points into Thaumaturge if you would like, but Elemental Expert will give you more return in terms of damage per CP point you allocate. Finally, for our red CPs, oops, I'm going to go 49 into both, hit 31 with Thick-Skinned, going to hit 40 with Ironclad, and we're going to go 31 into Bastion here. Now you can take a couple of points out of Bastion and hit the next jump point with Hardened Elemental Defender, which would be 56. So if you decide to do that, it's just 56 into both of these, like so. And then take out the 14 points here out of Bastion. It's kind of up to you if you want to do that. Again, you'll see more return from Hardened Elemental Defender this way, more damage mitigation, and you do still have additional points to gain as you continue to level to get Bastion up to at least 30 points. So that's not that big of a deal. And anyways, you shouldn't be rezzing people too much, so Infusion isn't going to be terribly useful for you, except in maybe some scenarios where you have to res as a healer. So that is pretty much it for CP600 and the other CP distributions as well. So for max CP, you're going to want to check out my healing guide. I'll put a link to that in the description below for you guys. But like I said earlier, in a lot of these CP point distributions, a lot of this is going to be based on personal preference. So, you know, if you want to get the most out of, for example, Arcanist, and you can put 100 points to Arcanist, but just remember that you're basically putting 25 points into that node in exchange for a 1% additional magical regen. So it's kind of up to you whether you think that it's worth putting those 25 points into Arcanist to get the extra 1% additional magical regen, or if you want to put it into other nodes where you'll see a little bit more return per CP that you spend. That's kind of up to you how you want to play it. Support roles, tanks, and healers, you have a little bit more flexibility with your CPs. It kind of depends on your healing style and your tanking style. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.